Good morning, everyone. Come on. Good morning, everyone. Okay, a little bit of energy. So, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Steve Peterson, an emergency manager from the United States National Institutes of Health. I would like to share a story of how Steve came to ISCRAM. So Steve told me his story, but I know the real story. We were in Brazil at ISCRAM 2016, and this cool guy comes up and he says, I just heard about ISCRAM. I just found you guys. This is amazing. And I said, well, let's just go hang out on the Copacabana beach and have a beer and talk about it. It's been 3 years, and today we see the product of that beer on the beach. Steve's involvement with ISCRAM began in 2016 with a poster submission to the conference being held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The poster promoted the importance of research conducted on the concurrent usage of technology during disasters. It highlighted virtual assistance efforts during the 2015 Nepal earthquake. He selected the ISCRAM annual conference as the launch pad for promoting the experience and was thrilled when his poster was accepted. In 2017, Steve's sustained desire for collaborating with ISCRAM and his sensing of the value to further the awareness of social media analyses called for action. He initiated a paper with his friends from Humanity Road to highlight their mutual efforts associated with performing social media analysis during 2 large-scale disasters in 2015. In 2018, Steve advocated for the integration of a researcher into an emergency operations center during an exercise scenario being conducted by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security on the United States-Canadian border. Adding the researcher to the exercise confirmed that researchers can bring value through a physical presence. The results of the exercise led to Steve and officials from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to develop a poster that showcased the success of multi-jurisdictional, multi-discipline exercise that included research. He submitted both a poster and a paper for consideration at ISCRAM 2018. Steve has sustained an enthusiastic approach to enhancing and refining collaborative techniques aligned with multiple disciplines and jurisdictions, locally, nationally, and internationally. And it is because of this enthusiasm and the professional competence that he conveys that we at ISCRAM are honored to have him as our keynote speaker here in Valencia, Spain, for our 2019 conference. Please welcome to the podium, Steve Peterson.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you from a practitioner's perspective about the complexities of analyzing social media data during disasters and how we can potentially address those challenges. So what I'm going to do is, our agenda is going to be broken into 2 sections. The first section is going to be an operations-based scenario where you all get to play a role as a team lead in a digital volunteer organization. We're going to run through that scenario, and at its conclusion, we're going to transition into the second part of the agenda, which is going to integrate research into the scenario to potentially address those complexities that you're about to experience. So let's go ahead and begin with the scenario. The United States Emergency Management Agency is about to experience a Category 5 hurricane. It is challenged with limited resources, anticipates widespread devastation, unforeseen challenges, and anticipates a high volume of social media. They know they don't have the resources available to do all that is needed, so they reach out to our organization, our digital volunteer organization, and sign into a memorandum of agreement for us to go ahead and provide them social media monitoring and analysis support. We are going to focus on Facebook and Twitter solely. Now, I understand there's a lot more social media platforms out there, but we're going to keep it simple and focus on Twitter and Facebook. What they specifically want us to do is look for hospital statuses as well as transportation-related issues and social media calls for help. Now that we have our game plan, let me just recap what I just discussed. My apologies. We have limited resources for social media. They sought our assistance. They anticipate social media is going to have a heavy presence, and the tasks have been identified for the hospital statuses, transportation-related issues, and social media calls for help. Let's go ahead and talk about our digital volunteer organization in greater detail now. Our organization has over 500 volunteers. Now that we have a mission assigned to us for this emergency management agency, we need to communicate to our members. We're going to send out an email to them to say, we need as much assistance as possible. We have, let's just say, a 48-hour period of time to provide this assistance to the emergency management agency. 20 of our members have responded positive that they're going to go ahead and assist us during this effort. The first thing that we need to do with our members that have positively confirmed that they're going to assist is hold a coordination call. The coordination call is imperative to go over what it is we're assigned, tell them what platforms we're going to use or analyze, as well as identify the data aggregation tools we're going to use and the collaboration tools that we're going to use. This is a very important meeting that we're going to hold with the members, because we're going to also discuss the processes for escalating social media calls for help that are discovered during this 48-hour period of time. What you see here on the slide, I'm not going to go into the specific details of every single one of those circles and triangles, but this verification checklist is our training for our volunteers during that coordination call or immediately following it. We're going to go through step by step what their expectations are. Once we get our data down to a manageable number that individuals can look tweet by tweet or post by post, we expect them to go through each and every one of these steps in order to find actionable intelligence that we can forward on to the emergency management agency. In the lower left corner is probably the most important part of this entire effort, and that's the collaborative working document. It doesn't matter what tool you can use, whether it's Google, whatever. But that is where all our volunteers, the 20 of them, any information they find is going to be placed within this document. We're going to have our emergency management agency have access to this document. Now, this document contains raw data. The emergency management agency is only going to have read-only access. We're not going to give them the ability to make any modifications to it. But if they ever want to look at what we're doing, they can look within that document. During this 48-hour period, we're going to have 12-hour shifts for our volunteers. At the conclusion of the 12 hours, we're going to develop a consolidated report and give that to the emergency management agency. In other words, we're going to clean up the data that's within that collaborative working document and provide it to the emergency management agency. There's one additional step as the team lead that we are, is we want to verify also the accuracy of the information. Is it relevant? Is it pertinent? Is it now overcome by events? We want to get it as close to accurate as possible. So then we proceed to provide that to the emergency management agency. Given that we have 20 members, we're going to break it out, and we have 3 tasks. We're going to break it out into 2 teams respectively. Team 1 is going to focus on hospital statuses, and Team 2 is going to focus on transportation-related issues. Now, you see the red bar. That is a mutual effort amongst both teams that while they're doing their task, if they find any social media calls for help, they're to escalate to us, the team lead, so we can communicate that immediately to the emergency management agency. We're also going to put those social media calls for help within the collaborative working document. And I think you could probably see right here, this document that's being developed is probably a good source to, I don't know, do some research down the road, because it'll have some valuable information. It'll have date timestamps within it. So after they find any social media calls for help or hospital or transportation issues, they're going to put it in the document. Okay, so now we have our volunteers. They've been trained and assigned. The escalation procedures for social media calls for help have been identified, and we've identified the collaboration and aggregation tools, so everyone on our team should feel comfortable with their assignments. If it didn't know this by now, this is all being done before the hurricane has made landfall. So you could see how much effort is involved in such a short period of time to stand up the digital volunteer organization and get them prepared to do their tasks. Okay, let's fast forward now to the hurricane. The Category 5 hurricane has now made landfall, and as anticipated, there's widespread devastation, particularly in the area in which the Emergency Management Agency is responsible for. Emergency communication centers are rendered inoperable. There's power outages, flooding, there's a lot of damage. And there's a heavy social media presence. For our volunteers to even do what it is they need to do, they need to have data. So we need to take that data aggregation tool and create some data sets. So the slide you see before you, again, we're focused only on Facebook and Twitter. We're just going to make an assumption that there's, I'd say, 1 million hurricane-related tweets and posts readily available within our tool. First step we're going to do is we're going to filter it down into 2 respective categories. It's going to begin with health and medical and transportation. I refer to it also as logistics, but for today's sake, we'll just say transportation. The next step, so we go from 1 million down to, let's say, 100,000 tweets and posts respectively for both assignments. Then we're going to take and rank those 100,000 tweets and posts according to relevancy of high, medium, or low, and we're just going to pick medium to get it down to a more manageable data set. And that more manageable data set for individuals to actually look at the individual tweets is 2,000, and that's pretty doable. We're going to call them the hospital data set and the logistics data set. So now we have our data, and let's go ahead and delve into the processes over the next 48 hours that our volunteers are going to take in analyzing the social media data. So we picked a 12-hour period of time from the impact of the hurricane to when we collected our data. We wanted a period of time to get a large volume of data, but we had to pick a time to stop collecting data in order so we could analyze it. So we picked 12 hours. So that's when our data sets for hospitals and transportation were developed. We're going to have the Team 1 and Team 2 concurrently analyze their respective data sets, looking for either hospital or transportation-related issues and social media calls for help. We're going to call this Shift 1. Now, of particular interest up there, you'll see in red, is the word -2 and -1. And what I'm referring to there is what oftentimes can happen with volunteer organizations. The key word here is they're volunteers. So there could be other issues that surface, family emergency, whatever it is, just don't feel like helping out. It is a challenge. So we're going to say the first team lost 2 of its members who are going to potentially analyze the hospital data set. So as team leads, we have to make adjustments in our teams. So you can see how team dynamics can influence the analysis, and we're constrained to a 48-hour period here. And team 2 had one member who didn't show up. At the conclusion of their 12-hour period, this is really important, there needs to be another coordination call. We need to sit down and talk over what it was that each team found in their analysis during that 12-hour period. We need to identify if there are any similarities, any differences, any challenges, any best practices to share so that they can do or improve the job the next time they do an analysis. What's also important during this is, if it can be done, is to have the second shift on that call. Because the second shift, if there are best practices or lessons learned during the first 12 hours, it'd be good for the second shift to know before they even begin doing their analysis. So note here, we're still working off of that first data set that was developed 12 hours after the hurricane made landfall. So the second shift begins its analysis for either hospital information or logistics. Team 1 identifies the first social media call for help. So their focus has been all along on looking for hospital-related issues, but they come across this tweet, and they immediately contact us to say, I have important information, and what's more important is they need to confirm that we've received it so we can escalate to the emergency management agency. So as you can see, as you're going along with your primary assignment, there might be some disruptions such as this, where you have to this takes precedence before you can go any further. So this individual escalated it, documented within the collaborative working document, and then proceeds to go back to looking at hospital-related statuses. Now, here comes another complexity. Chaos within chaos, a disaster within a disaster. Down in the city where the emergency management agency is responsible for, a tornado strikes. This is during the 48-hour period of time in which we're assigned the responsibility of looking for hospital statuses, transportation-related issues, and social media calls for help. Now we have another disaster that has occurred while we were doing this work. The Emergency Management Agency has now asked us if we can focus our attention, in addition to what we're doing, on the tornado. They want us to find any pertinent information, a very broad responsibility, not down to hospitals or transportation, any pertinent information that we think is of value to them relative to the tornado. So now we have ourselves a third data set that needs to be generated, and this one is all about the tornado. So this is going to be a high quantity of tweets and posts. Both teams are going to have access to that same data set, however. So as they're going along, they're going to analyze 2 data sets, both teams, relative to the tornado and relative to the initial hurricane. You can imagine at this time, this coordination call at the conclusion of this shift's assignment is really important, that we have the third shift on the call to tell them we have another assignment. We have the tornado to look at, and here's access to that data set. So once again, that's another important thing, is the transitioning the effort to the next shift to ensure that they're aware of what their assignments are. We're about 36 hours into when the hurricane made landfall. We are working off what I would deem to be potentially stale, static data that was generated 12 hours after the hurricane. So we're at risk right now of looking at old data. So we're going to take it upon ourselves to generate new data sets at this point in time. We're going to develop a new hospital data set, and we're going to generate a new transportation-related data set. But what's of importance here is that we still have note of the old hospital and transportation-related data sets. And so this is where I believe research could potentially help. And I'll talk about that shortly, because there's still data that's in those data sets, but at this point in time, we need to find the freshest information, the most actionable intelligence, and so that's why it's important to generate new data sets. We're going to still work, however, with the same tornado data set. And again, this coordination call at the conclusion is very important because we have new data sets, so this shift, when it comes on, has to understand they're looking at new data, and it probably has new numbers that are unfamiliar with to them. So we want to make sure they're comfortable in their assignment. So then we proceed with the fourth shift. They conclude their assignment. They do a coordination call, and we're done with our assignment for the Emergency Management Agency. What we just saw was our mission assignment was focused on identifying hospital statuses, transportation-related issues, social media calls for help, and the additional tornado-related issues that we could find. That was our mission. Note the title of this slide, because this is another complexity emergency managers or digital volunteer organizations, whomever it might be, face. Look at all these other agencies, these other volunteer organizations, potential volunteer organizations, whomever it might be. We have this potential challenge of having local, national, international assistants doing social media analysis concurrently while we're focused on our little emergency management agency down here. So there could be other formal digital volunteer organizations that are signed into an agreement with the neighboring emergency management agency. There could be ad hoc digital volunteers that have no affiliation or association or communication with emergency management agencies that are doing their analysis. You could have other teams that are looking for hospital-related statuses. So my question is there any coordination that has taken place amongst these emergency management agencies, these digital volunteer organizations? That's the big question. I'm not sure what the answer is all the time, but I do know in some recent hurricanes in the United States, particularly Hurricane Harvey, there were some disconnects. And it's also influenced by external factors, and you can see in the lower right corner there of volunteers who are physically on site. So with all good intentions, these volunteers who have the ability to take, for example, their own personal boat to go rescue someone who has tweeted their needs because they couldn't call 911, the emergency communication center, they go and aid them. Does the emergency management agency know that? Well, not necessarily. We just provided that agency that this person needs assistance, and there's no traffic in the post or the tweet that says it's been taken care of. So that's a risk. Another factor is the media. The media can amplify, positive or negative, information that's found within social media, which ultimately might impact the response of the emergency management agency. So I asked the question again, is there coordination amongst those agencies, the media, and the volunteers who are physically present? And I think one of the examples was the Cajun Navy took their coordination efforts and communicated internally using Zello app, did a great job amongst themselves. I don't believe there was any communication, or not effectively, with the emergency management agencies. But let's not forget what's going on at the same time, all right? So everything that you've heard up until this point, we're still in a pretty rich period of time following a disaster. This is what's going on at the same time. So we're working off static data sets. This is still flowing in, ladies and gentlemen. People are still posting tweets, Facebook posts, everything relative to the disaster. So although we're focused on this, there's more information coming along. It is complete information overload for ourselves and for other emergency management agencies to try to tackle social media during the disaster. What I want to do now is I want to transition into research, because this is where I think we can collectively begin to address those complexities you just heard about. Interestingly, I looked at our program a couple weeks ago. We have 27 papers submitted for ISCRAM 2019 in the social media and crisis and conflicts track alone. 27, 12 of which were complete research, and 15 which were work in progress. The words you see upon this slide right here were all extracted from the respective abstracts. So obviously there's a lot of great research that's being done out there. And what I described today with our scenario, there were plenty of opportunities just at this one level of our digital volunteer organizations for potential research. For example, during the human data analysis, threat rigidity, information entropy, all the various different challenges that the human can face. That's one example. From a technological standpoint, what about noise removal fallacies in our data aggregation when we generate those data sets? In terms of organizational challenges and communications, internal communications amongst our digital volunteer organizations, these are just examples of potential opportunities. And for the research community, which certain is a large presence in the audience today, you're probably saying, well, Steve, how can we do that? And the one area that I would propose is to look at a really challenging situation, which it would be, why not collaborate with the emergency management agency, the digital volunteer organization, and attempt to do real-time research? Because there is so much valuable, rich data that's being done during the analysis that cannot be done in retrospective research. So you might have access to data sets that generated post-disaster, but those data sets that we did within a 12-hour period and then a 48-hour period, wow, there's some really good stuff in there, but it's never been researched further, and that's where I think we could do something. How do we do that? Well, potentially a research activation team, because I've listened, I've heard about the challenges of institutional review boards and the lengthy process it takes to get them to sign off on getting out and conducting research. If by some way, and we'll talk about this a little bit during the panel later on with my fellow panelists, if we could ultimately get the research community out to do research, I believe that we have some really good content. This obviously has to be done through established relationships and partnerships pre-disaster. So, for example, if you know in your community, wherever globally you reside, you have seasonal disasters that you know is going to come next 6 months from now. Perhaps you can start working on, hey, the next time we have a cyclone, the next time we have a hurricane, perhaps you can do it that way. I think it's also important that the practitioners get involved in a wee bit of the development of the research so they feel empowered to want to contribute, and perhaps in doing that, they could lay out some things that they would like to see research look at. When research is done and published in proceedings and journals, it would be wonderful if it was mutually beneficial to both research and practice, because other advocates such as myself, social media advocates who are trying to operationalize social media and get it within the emergency management community, are already facing a challenge because there's a lot of emergency management skeptics that still exist. When research produces results and publishes them in journal articles and proceedings, we can then take that information that you do and go to our skeptic peers and say, look, the University of so-and-so just conducted this research, and it proves that it can be effective. We can use that to our advantage to further promote the effectiveness of social media during disasters and win over the support of our skeptic peers. Equally important is a research feedback loop. So let's say we can get this done where we can collaborate and we can identify some mutually beneficial goals. What about the information coming back to whom you've collaborated with so that they can ultimately improve their standard operating procedures, for example? So, hey, tell us what we did right, tell us what we did wrong, and what you observed during our analysis. That would be very helpful. So I want to just share a little bit of information about what's going on in the United States, some efforts that are underway that lend some clues of some areas of importance that research could potentially focus upon. I'll begin by talking about the White House's Office of Science, Technology, and Policy. They had a hurricane information flow workshop in May of 2018 where representatives from Facebook and Twitter were present, local, state, and federal representatives were present, as well as other stakeholders. During this all-day workshop, they had one particular area which was focused on social media, and the stakeholders came out and raised their hands about concerns. And I'll just point out three of the concerns that is found within this report, and it's on the White House's website. One of them was managing high volumes of data, tackling misinformation, and closing the loop. And what I mean by that is social media calls for help when action has been taken upon and there's no report put back on the social media platform, so that there's no need to allocate resources to go save the individual or individuals. So those are just some sampling from that report. It's a really good report to look at. Now, the Department of Homeland Security has a social media working group, and we've produced a lot of reports over the last 6 years. And most recently, for the reports, they have over 130 pages of lessons learned and best practices, really good information. The reports are like operationalizing social media, embedding social media within exercises, how to tackle misinformation, fake news. All that information is available on DHS's website and lends some clues as to areas of importance. Now, the working group is comprised of academic professionals, disaster responders, and other individuals. So you have a wide range of members So those reports are very good and worthy of looking at. The Homeland Security also has a Science and Technology Directorate that developed a digital volunteer guide which tells agencies or guides agencies on how they could develop a digital volunteer group internal to their agency or through signing an MOU with an NGO or elsewhere. And I find this report, or the guide, so wonderful because it tackles one of the challenges that my peers oftentimes say, which is we don't have the resources to monitor social media during disaster, let alone do our primary responsibilities. It's a challenge. Well, it certainly is a challenge, but this digital volunteer program guide shows you how you can get those resources. So it's awesome. But this guide also could lend some clues as to potential areas to focus research on as well. And last but not least, as Andrea said, I work at the National Institutes of Health. We have one institute in there called the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. They have a program called the Disaster Research Response Program, the DR2 program. It is a fantastic program. Its primary mission, its focus, is to get researchers out as rapidly as possible following a disaster, because they have acknowledged the same thing. Although their research might be focused on human subjects in the health sciences community, the model that they use is to get it out there and get that data, that the data's gone, the valuable data is gone relatively quickly. So the model that they've developed is fantastic. And if you'd like further information about that, I've brought some information with me to our conference. I can share that after the presentation. So the DR2 program is great. Okay. So what we experienced here today was an operations-based scenario where we all played the role as a digital volunteer or team lead. So that was our operations. That was our practitioner's perspective. And then you saw us transition into talking about the research. This speech has been all about integrating and collaborating between the two disciplines. And I hope you found it of value and see opportunities to further explore this necessary relationship. And in doing so, I think it's very important, if we do that, we focus on ISCRAM, because I can't think of a better place to do this collaborating than the ISCRAM community. And with that, I'm going to conclude today's presentation. Thank you for your time. I'm ready to field any of your questions if you have any. Ed, yes.
Steve, the round trip of your information processing, using the volunteers, creating that collaboration document, seems to be long. And for a rapid onset, so the round trip seems to be long of the process using volunteers. There's lots of manual steps in what you described. And I'm not criticizing at all the number of steps, because those are all important steps.
Absolutely.
But for a rapid onset disaster, like the second part of your scenario when the tornado was spun up, and you have something new that's in your face that you don't have the lead time for that you do for a hurricane. In a hurricane, you've got a couple days lead time.
Right, advance warning.
Right. So is there an opportunity to automate more of the steps that you have in your process?
Absolutely, yes. So I appreciate you observe that. I'm proud that we've gotten to this point that we can at least do something, albeit manually. The fact is we're still fighting an uphill battle of developing this and showing this proof of concept is not a concept but a reality. So albeit it is very tedious, somewhat time consuming, right now it's not being done effectively that I know of. And so what we're trying to do is just show progress. And so certainly that would be the next phase, is once we start exploring this and perhaps maybe even engage with the research community to do some research on this whole process, we can then look to further automate it. But yes, I'm aware of that situation at this point in time, but it works and it's been effective. We've not had any complaints. So what we described, what you experienced here today with the scenario that was driven, that was not fictitious. So in my spare time, although I'm here representing the National Institutes of Health, I'm also Montgomery County, Maryland's Community Emergency Response Team's digital volunteer team lead, as well as its past president. And that was one of the scenarios that that scenario was actually utilized during a real disaster during the Nepal earthquake, and then the Republic of Vanuatu cyclone that struck that same year. So we actually did do something very similar to that. So that was not fictitious, that was real. So thank you for your question, Ed. Any other questions?
Yes, thank you very much, Steve. I really love your call for rapid research response teams. I'm just wondering a little bit about what kind of research you're looking for and what kind of questions, what you want to do with the research. You say influence the decision makers to integrate social media information more in digital humanitarians. But some of the research that we do is actually also more critical, so it reveals the complexities of that or the frictions of that integration. So the former responders have responsibilities for information that are quite different from how digital humanitarians can generate information. So how do you envisage that kind of research to be integrated into a rapid response?
Well, thank you, Monica, for the question. I think that needs to be defined when we first sit down and collaborate and identify those issues like you just described, differentiating between a digital volunteer organization and a formal emergency management agency. What I would like to get out of research is to be defined as well too. At the point in time is just to show that there were opportunities. I was looking at that more. I've read multiple papers over the years from ISCRAM dating back to 2015 and 2016. And so I really never narrowed it down to that's the area that we specifically need. It's just everything that I read, I see there's so much applicability in what we do in analyzing social media data that I just flag it. So, I was hoping by presenting this to you today for those in the audience that does any kind of research that pertinent or relative to that we could have that conversation to further hone in on what it is we particularly want. What I think the best thing we can get out of this, again, is for us, the emergency managers that are advocating for social media to be utilized within emergency management, to take the finished results of the research, to be able to say we have this neutral, unbiased entity that has showed us that it's doable, because that is something that they can't say no to, are those that we're still struggling with. I mean, they can probably still say no, but it does help us to our advantage. So yeah, I'm sorry if I didn't come up with a specific targeted research. It's just a broad plea to try to collaborate with research. We have a question up here.
Hi, Steve. I'm Andrea.
Hi, Andrea.
The question that I have is similar to Monica's, but if there are unfinished, half-baked, garage-style products that research makes. And we often do. We create tools that scrape social media, process it, display it on a map. One of the things that researchers would love to do is get people to try it out.
I think some in emergency management would love to try those things out. So those half-baked, not fully completed stuff is actually what we would love to see, because if you didn't know already, a lot of the decisions we make in emergency management is based on impartial data. We have to make decisions very quickly, so I'm sure what might be constitute half-baked and relatively incomplete within the research community might actually be effective and good enough for what we're looking for. So I think it would be a welcome experience to see it.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Okay.
I'm bringing
Got
my...
it. You got it.
Thank you, Steve, for a very interesting presentation and challenges. I love that you finished your talk pointing out that ISCRAM can help or should help. And my question is the following: how could we actually increase, say, our influence, both as researchers and practitioners, concerning what the funding bodies define as priorities? I assume that in the United States, the National Science Foundation set some priorities, as we do in Europe, the European Union, and also the national research bodies. They define some research priorities. So my question is, how could we pass, knowing the needs, issues that need to be solved, how could we pass this and influence the funding bodies that define research programs? Because we need funding.
Yes, I know. It's a good question. I forgot to, that's another one of the challenges I've been presented from talking with the research community, is not just the length of time the IRB process takes to ultimately get out there to collaborate, but also the funding. One of the effective strategies that has been used before to seek funding, and this is, I'm going to take my NIH hat off for a moment and go back to the Community Emergency Response Team, is although we're a volunteer organization and made up of volunteers, so we don't have any money that we have to give out, so it's all free time. When we take and implement these concepts that we have done, like you saw today, the scenario, and we proved it, and then we wrote up an after-action report that just said, look how beneficial this was for the community, the stakeholders, whichever scenario it was. So I gave you two examples that were international, which was Vanuatu and Nepal. We've done it for multiple hurricanes, Matthew, Harvey, Irma, Marie. We've deployed, virtually activated for those as well. We go back to leadership within our parent organization and say, how can you say no to what we're doing here? This is a good thing. And then when the grant funding comes available for the county or the state, and they get their money for whatever they're having, we attempt to try by showing them we're a valuable resource and to keep us alive and sustain the operation. So we do it through implementing the proofs of concepts first to a point where then we proceed to show it to them. So, I mean, it's almost as if you have to sacrifice or find a little bit of funding to start it and then continue to make progress and show results and provide that to leadership. That's probably all I can give as far as advice, Jose. So.
Thank you for your presentation. It strikes me that a lot of these problems that you are presenting, or challenges, are similar to the challenges that you see in intelligence work. for instance, looking at a static and a dynamic set of data simultaneously, how to prioritize. Do you know if there has been any attempts to look at intelligence studies to see if there are any clues or interesting research areas that could be utilized in your?
Not until you just mentioned it just now, and now I will. I don't know of that. That's a really good area to further look at and potentially use as a model, but we haven't, or I haven't myself. I forgot to mention something earlier was the reason I advocate so much for research presence in real time. There have been instances where during the analysis, I might have two data sets that I'm looking at that were run with the same relevancy, and I repeat it 2 minutes later, and the numbers are not aligning. So there's a differential between the two, and then there was something there that there's a problem that I don't have the time in making decisions going forward with our responsibility, that if I had someone over my shoulder, a researcher, they would have experienced it. Physically being present with an analyst during an intense, time-constrained analysis, you get to pick up some audio cues, visual cues that are just not available in data, and so that was another reason why I was promoting that. So, but back to what you said, I'll have to look at that. I haven't done that before. Oh, okay, good. It wasn't too long.
If you would, please give Steve Peterson a hand and thank him. Don't go anywhere. Immediately after Steve's talk, we have a panel focusing on practitioners. So please stay. We've got more fun to come.